We've talked about passing parameters to functions as a way to share values between functions. Usually when we have a function call and we pass in an argument, right, we make a copy of that value and pass it off to the function, and then both functions, both the called function and the function that called it, have their own separate copy of that value. Things work a little bit differently when we pass an array. So when we pass an array to a function, what actually happens is that that array is shared between the two functions, the function that we call and the function who called it. So any changes that we make to the array inside the function will persist back in the same in the function that it was called from. So I've added on to the program that we saw in the previous video. So in the previous video, we have this function SumArray that took an array as a parameter, added together all the values in the array, and then returned the result, or the sum. I've added a second function called fillArray. So now notice I declare my array inside main, but I don't assign it any values. So this array is uninitialized right now. Then what I do is I call my fillArray function. So notice fillArray is void. It doesn't return a value, but it takes in our array as a parameter. Inside fillArray, I go through and I fill the array with values. Again, this works because array parameters are shared between the two functions. So this array is shared between main and fillArray. Anything that I do to the array A inside fillArray will actually update the array nums back in main. This is different than the way that parameters usually work in C. The typical parameters that we've been seeing are called pass by value because we make a copy of the value and give it to the other function. Arrays are passed by reference because we're sharing the same memory space. So these arrays, A in fillArray and nums in main, even though they have different names, they're actually referring to the exact same physical memory locations. So changes in one place will affect the array that the other function sees. So let's go ahead and run this program and see what happens. So here you can see this is what's printed out inside the function, right? These are the values in my array. When I get back to main, right, now nums has all of those values in it because the changes that I made to A in fillArray affect nums back in main. So then on the next line, when I call SumArray and pass in nums, the sum that I get is the sum of the values that were filled into that array in the fillArray function. So we'll talk a little bit more about this in class, and it's something that's really important to understand about how arrays as parameters work. That they're passed by reference, so the memory is shared between the two functions, and any changes made in the called function will affect the argument that was passed in the calling function.